Hi, my name is Ryan Pack,
And I'm Nicole Barlow.
and this is Soundtrack Your Life, where we speak with a guest about a soundtrack that is important to them. Our guest today is fashion designer and Slinky Vagabond singer Keanan Duffty. Welcome, Keanan.
Hey, nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me on, Ryan and Nicole. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're so excited to talk to you. Keenan's band Slinky Vagabond, they have a new single out right now. They have a new album coming out on January 14th. So pick up the new album.
Yeah, it's called The Eternal Return, which means that you keep doing the same things over and over again, which is kind of the pattern of my life. So there you go.
Well, this is new.
This is new. Yeah, of course, this is new.
So your band Slinky Vagabond, it is you and Fabio Fabri. You are the two permanent members of the band.
Yeah.
And you have kind of a rotating cast as you guys do each album, right?
Yeah, well, we started, so back in 2007, I started the band with a guitar player called Earl Slick, who's played with David Bowie since like 1974. And we started it as a project to record some songs. And then I got a couple of other friends involved, which were Glenn Matlock and Clem Burke, who's the drummer from Blondie. And obviously Glenn is one of the founders of the Sex Pistols. And that was sort of like the beginning of the band, but almost we went into the studio, did a bunch of recording, supported the New York Dolls, played a bunch of gigs, played New York Fashion Week and all that. And then as soon as that kind of started, the Pistols reformed and Blondie went back on tour in earnest. So it kind of became this, it kind of put a comma or a pause on the project. And then it restarted again in 2017, so 10 years later, when I met Fabio in Italy. And I met him because I was giving a lecture with Glenn Matlock, and Fabio came along to that to schmooze Glenn probably, but he ended up schmoozing me. And that's sort of how we came into being again.
Wow, that's really cool. And so your new album, is it, like we said, is coming out in January. You have a single that you can get right now called Strange World.
Yeah, there's actually another single coming out with the album, and it's a track called Icarus Falls. And there's a kind of rock version of that. And then I'm friends with this electronic duo in the UK called Cult with No Name, and they're brilliant. So I asked them if they would do a remix. So they basically redid the whole song. So it's basically Cult with No Name's backing and me singing over it. But it's great. I love that version of it. It's really cool. So yeah, we have that single, and then the album comes out on January 14th, and it's on vinyl, CD, and streaming too. Red vinyl.
Oh, nice. We've gotten a little sneak peek at the album. It's great.
Thank you.
It's just like I miss rock music like
that.
There aren't many guitar bands these days. It's kind of interesting. I feel like we're on the precipice of a new wave of guitar music. And probably Oasis are reforming next year, and I mean they're it's like, who thought that would ever happen? And maybe some people wish it wouldn't, but it might kind of kick into gear a few younger artists to sort of get out there and do it again. So that's good.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'm still not counting the proverbial chickens about the Oasis reunion. I'm holding my breath a little bit. Let's see.
I think they probably need the money at this stage, so we'll see.
I wouldn't refuse it.
Yeah, it's a great rock record. It doesn't it's like a balance of, it sounds modern, but it doesn't. But there's not a lot of guitar music these days,
Sure,
so
yeah.
in a way, it's a little bit retro and modern at the same time.
Yeah, well, my songwriting partner Fabio, he's an amazing guitar player, and he has a little studio in Florence in Italy, which is not a bad place to have to go to record. So his sort of influences, he's very much classic rock. He loves Pink Floyd, he loves the Beatles, he loves Bowie, all of that. And I have a kind of broader palette. I really like electronic music, and when I started in the 80s, that it was playing electronic music and recording and releasing electronic music. So I always sort of have that, in the background for me, and something danceable, something with a bit of groove. So I think it has those elements in there as well, and it's recorded electronically, as in it's not a band going in and recording live. That's what we did back in the day with Earl Slick and Glenn and Clem. We would go in as a band and we recorded an album and recorded it live. But with this, we track it, and we actually recorded the drums last. We had a friend of ours, Christian Dryden, who's the leader of a fantastic band called the Ritualists, and he's a great multi-instrumentalist. And he came in and did the drums for us in a studio in Brooklyn. So it's kind of a weird thing to record the drums last. Everything else is tracked and built up, and the vocals are all done, and then he came in and laid down the grooves again, and it was great because it kind of brings it to life. A live drummer is really good, and he's very, very experienced musician. So he banged out 11 or 12 songs like in a day and a half. So it was a major accomplishment. And his band are great too. Check them out. They're always touring. They're always playing around New York, and they go on tours up and down the Northeast and the East Coast. And hopefully they'll come out to the West Coast at some stage too. So they're a good guitar band.
Yeah, fingers crossed for us on the West Coast.
Yeah.
So Keanan, you're also a fashion designer. You are a man of many things, but you are also a fashion designer.
Yeah.
And an author.
Well, it's all kind of linked, really. I make a living as a fashion designer and as an educator too. Teaching fashion education. So that's the way I've always made a living. Music has always been a passion for me. I love doing it. But I kind of figured out earlier on in my career that you could have a career in fashion, and it would probably last a bit longer than a career, or a lot longer than a career in music. So that's kind of that's what I've pursued, and it treats me well. So.
Yeah, you're being very humble. Being a stylist for the Sex Pistols, being a stylist for the hugely influential CFDA Awards tribute to Bowie that happened in 2016, which I think many Bowie fans, including myself, still remember with a lot of awe, and how beautifully done that was. You are a man of many talents, so it's quite a treat to have you here today. We're so glad you decided to do our little pod.
It's my pleasure.
I think that's a great segue to what we're talking to, because I feel like we're kind of keeping people in suspense.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that very kind overview there. That CFDA event was really good fun. I was able to actually, a friend of mine is the head of marketing for Kansai Yamamoto, so I was actually able to get some of those costumes shipped over from Japan, and they're original costumes, but they're duplicates that Kansai made, because obviously David had the originals on tour. And right. I'm a bit skeptical about the ones that are actually in the Bowie exhibit, because they can't be the original ones after all this time.
Don't break my heart, because I had, among many other folks, the incredible privilege of seeing it when it was at the Brooklyn Museum, and I had kind of the same meandering thought as, are these the originals, or as you said, are they duplicates that were made? Yeah. Regardless, they're such incredible pieces that
yes, they are. Yeah.
That the Dave Bowie's exhibit was one of the highlights of my life.
That was fantastic. Yeah, I think all credit to the Victoria and Albert Museum, because they did a really amazing job with that. And I actually got to interview the two curators in 2013, and they're no longer with the V&A. They kind of moved on to different roles, but they did an amazing job with that. And it's back at the V&A now. They have in Stratford upon Avon. They have in what was the Olympic Village, they have this amazing collection of 90,000 objects of Bowie, and it's opening in September of 2025. And I think it's a must for every Bowie fan.
It is a must. It is. You will not regret going. It is so well done, so beautifully curated. Such a testament to Bowie, but also to Bowie being kind of a hoarder, which really kept everything, which as a fan was so wonderful to see. I actually have some reminiscences about some things that are in the film that we're talking about today, so we can get into that.
Yeah, it's actually interesting. He definitely was a hoarder, because he always used to go on about, like, I'm not interested in the past, and the past is past. I'm only interested in the future. He had his keys from his Berlin apartment.
Yes, exactly. Things that I as a normal civilian would never think to keep. So
Well,
it
I
was
can't even keep my keys from my own apartment now, let
I
alone.
can't get
Right.
keys now, let alone my keys from, a time when I was on heavy drugs.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's what made him really focused.
He was, built different, let's say.
So Keenan, with your fashion background and with, your collaborations with David Bowie, we thought it was only natural that we talk about Jim Henson's 1986 film Labyrinth.
Yeah.
And I know through your publicist Ray, you sent us some thoughts.
Yeah, I can't remember what those thoughts were now, but you two are really young, so you probably grew up at the. I'm assuming maybe you're post Labyrinth, but you probably that movie probably intersected with your youthfulness. So it didn't for me because I was already like in my late 20s probably by the time, or mid 20s maybe by the time it came out. I think it came out in I was probably 20 or 21 actually in 85 when it came out. So it was kind of a really different take on the Bowie that my generation knew. So it was kind of funny, it's like it's so iconic, kids that I teach to, I say kids, people that I teach today, if they sort of know about my kind of Bowie connection, they always say, "Oh my God, Bowie, yeah, Labyrinth." And like everybody from my generation says, Bowie, oh yeah, The Man Who Fell to Earth, or
Right.
Ziggy Stardust, The Lad Insane, the Berlin trilogy, all of that, and yet it's for a certain generation, Labyrinth is the sort of touchstone, and I think it's amazing. It's great.
That's so interesting because, yes, Ryan and I are so young, but we were also, the 80s were quite a long time ago. I was 4 or 5, I think, when this
Yeah,
movie came out, and probably saw it a couple years later via my older sister, who was
right.
not judicious about the films that extremely young children should be watching. Um, but this is one of those films that I think for so many of us that kind of grew up with this dark fantasy era with the Dark Crystal and with the Jim
Yeah,
Henson Creature Shop, was very instrumental in forming the things that we like now and the aesthetics that we
sure.
gravitate to now. It was our first introduction to Bowie, who for a very long time, I think so many of us were just like, yeah, he's the guy with the codpiece from Labyrinth. It took me until I was well into my adolescence to realize that he had this, entire career. And, now I sit with my like Bowie poster behind me as just, like, a lifelong fan. But that was definitely it's definitely an interesting introduction to full fantasy 80s synth Bowie.
Yeah, it's it's the codpiece is all anything the only thing people talk about really. I mean, and it was apparently it was intent. All of that was absolutely intentional. To kind of the costuming was actually very carefully conceived to achieve a certain outcome. So yeah, I mean, I sort of it was always the Tina Turner fright wig that kind of put me off, and like I was kind of like, why did they let him do that? Or why did he let them do that to him? Because Bowie's always had amazing hair, and
Right.
that it looked like a suburban hairdresser's attempt at doing Tina Turner, but like not in a good way.
Right. Like Harry Gilden the Lily here. The man has a fantastic crop of hair.
It's got good hair, yeah.
I scoured the internet trying to find anything about the fashion designer for this film, who worked very closely with Chris Frood from Jen
Yeah,
Henson, who designed all of the kind of concept sketches. And she's a woman from Scotland who had mostly a TV career, and she was brought in for the Dark Crystal, and then subsequently brought in for Labyrinth.
right.
And she does talk about in one interview how they had a lot of laughs over various types of cod pieces
Yeah.
considered and hair pieces that they considered before Henson and Bowie collaborated on the final look. So you have to believe that Bowie was at least part of the process of like, yeah, put me in the Tina Turner fright wig.
Yeah, I mean, what is strange. So, um, Earl Slicker, I'm really good, been very good friends for a long time, and he always credits David with being an amazing actor, and he always says that the guy was actually a much better actor than people realized
Yeah.
because his from like 1967 he was playing David Bowie,
Yeah.
because David Bowie was actually also a character.
Right.
And when I worked with him, and I had a number of meetings with him, in personal meetings, and he wasn't. He was on downtime during those meetings. So I kind of met, David Jones
Mm.
several times, and I think that we kind of forget that, but he was very good at letting other people do their best work, which would suit the best outcome for a role that he was playing. So I
Mm.
think that he put a lot of trust probably in the team around Jim Henson and his team, and he was willing to go with it. He wasn't going to say, "Oh, that looks like a Tina Turner fright wig. I'm not wearing that." He was kind of like, "Oh, okay, that's their vision, and I'll go with it, and
Yeah,
I'll make a performance from this." So
that's so interesting.
yeah,
Do you think he just had a lot of trust in his collaborators? I know that Henson was considering 2 people for this role when it came down to it, and one was Michael Jackson, and the other was Bowie.
yeah,
And he reached out to Bowie via, a couple of letters, and they talked about it, and it sounded like David Bowie was kind of ready for this turn, this more, fantasy movie appeal, loved the script, loved the way it was, so he had a lot of trust in his
yeah,
collaborators. As an
yeah,
artist
sure.
himself, I feel like he must have appreciated where this could be going.
Yeah, and I think also he was very intuitive with popular culture, and he knew what a collaboration with Jim Henson meant. It was especially in American popular culture, all of Jim Henson's creations, they're kind of interwoven with the fabric of youth here. And I think what Bowie was really good at doing was thinking about the future, and actually anticipating, if I connect with young people, teenagers, now, they will become part of my cult, if you were, because I think he was very much aware of that he was actually underneath all of the massive success of Let's Dance. He was actually a cult artist,
Mm.
and he wanted to maintain that. And he also wanted to be able to reinvent. And I think he was very savvy about doing that with Labyrinth. And he did it. I mean, probably Man Who Fell to Earth was a good example of him doing that in a more embryonic stage, because when I worked with him, we did a collection for Target, and I tapped into Man Who Fell to Earth and Station to Station. Firstly, because they are the sort of iconic moments in the Bowie canon of characters, but also they're quite commercial in a way, because it's all black and white. It's very dressy. You couldn't get away with doing the one-legged jumpsuit in Target. No
Sure.
way. I mean, it wouldn't fly. But Man Who Fell to Earth, you could do that, and the buyers in a big box store would understand how the kind of weirdness of Bowie was offset by the dressiness. And so I
Mm.
think with Labyrinth, he kind of understood in the same way that although it was quite extreme, it would, in a fantasy sense, connect with an audience who would then maybe grow up with him. And like yourselves, that moment would really connect with you, in terms of popular culture, but also in an embryonic way.
Yeah. Did
So
you feel, I mean, in that example of working with him on this Target collection, which I know nothing about, by the way, what year was that? Do you recall?
that was also 2007 was a big year for me.
Mm.
So I actually I met David in December of 2006 to talk about it, and then it actually was developed throughout 2007, and we launched it in the fall of 2007. And that's when I also started working with old Slick, and I couldn't tell Slicky about the Bowie collaboration because it was very much under wraps.
Secret. Yeah.
So I was sort of like, and I was meeting with David, and I was thinking like, I'm in the studio with your guitar player. I told him eventually, because I kind of felt weird about, that, but I wanted to be kind of open about it. But yeah, that was in 2007. So, it was interesting because, I could see in that as well where he was trying to calibrate to connect with popular culture, because at that time Target were in the beginning of doing all of those collaborations, and I think he knew that he wasn't doing anything. He was kind of under the radar, but I think he knew that that was a way of connecting again with a different audience, and maybe with a young audience, because it was aimed at sort of 16 to 14 to 18-year-olds probably. So he was very savvy with that, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, very savvy and very like forward looking always,
Sure.
never
Yeah.
too backwards looking, or at least that's how it feels like as a fan, he was always thinking about what the future had.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean the movie itself, I kind of had a reassessment of it because there was a Barnes and Noble near where I live. It's closed now, as all bookstores seem to be closing. But there was a Barnes and Noble near where I lived, and they had the hardback graphic novels of Labyrinth, and the rendering of Bowie of the Jareth character in that. It sort of has the same costuming and the same hair, but the person looks more kind of anime influenced. And I kind of thought like, oh, I wish they'd got it a bit more like that in the movie, a bit more almost animated,
Hmm.
because some of the elements. He's a bit old as well to be being a goblin. It's like kind of pushing 40 or whatever.
Well, it's a
Um,
Goblin King.
it was the Goblin King, yeah. So, but in the graphic novel, it's sort of Bowie, but not. And I thought that made me understand it a little bit better through the eyes of what would have been a kid at that time. But yeah, the costuming is amazing. And throughout the whole movie, all of those weird little characters that pop up here and there, and
Yeah.
I think it's Jennifer Connelly, right? Who's
Yes,
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
14-year-old Jennifer
yeah.
very
Connelly.
So
young Jennifer Connelly. It almost wasn't Jennifer Connelly. I
and it
know.
almost, yeah. But my wife has a good story about that. Her
Oh,
former business partner was, I think, I may be misremembering this, and she may come running in and tell me, no, that's not right. But her former business partner was kind of a chaperone for Jennifer Connelly at that time, and taking her to auditions and things. So
interesting.
that was one of her first role. I think it was her first major movie
Right,
role.
right,
Yeah,
Yeah, she moved to London for
right.
yeah,
that.
Because she's so young,
yeah.
incredibly young.
And she's amazing in it. She's really a fantastic. It's a great performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very captivating in this
Yeah.
film, but it almost wasn't, as things,
Yeah.
tend to go. I know there's a pretty funny casting story behind that as well, right, Ryan?
Yeah, so actually, I think they were originally going to cast Helena Bonham Carter,
Oh, right.
but then they didn't want a British girl; they wanted an American
Right.
girl. And then out of the American kind of group, there was Jennifer Connelly, Sarah Jessica Parker, Jane Krakowski. I think they were kind of the finalists. I believe Laura Dern and Ali Sheedy were also kind of
Mm.
considered. So, a who's who of
Yeah.
actresses. A lot of them are still very popular
Sure.
today. And then, as far as the Bowie role, so Henson and Frood, they really wanted a pop star. So that's why Michael Jackson was also a possibility. I think Prince was also considered, but I'm pretty sure Prince wanted too much creative control because it's just a couple of years after Purple Rain.
Yes.
Um, but they wanted Jareth to be both dangerous but also very alluring, and that's why they say the cod piece is
Right.
intentional. They wanted Jareth to be um, tempting for Sarah.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be impactful to that audience as well. Certain things that like it's like a coming of age story
Yeah.
of the character of the Jennifer Connelly character, but it's also the coming of age of the audience too.
Right.
So they probably all these poor kids grew up with with David Bowie's codpiece haunting them at night.
Well, I mean, I always say, like, I think it warped me as a child, but in, like, the best possible way because it's
Yeah,
been such a heavy influence in my life. I don't think that I would be the person that I am without some of the Henson creations, and then this movie specifically, which I was obsessed
right.
with for years and still am. Here in LA, they actually have this thing called the Labyrinth of Jareth, and it's a masquerade ball, a costumed masquerade ball. They have the Biltmore Hotel every year.
Mm,
So, people of my generation and probably younger and older are still flock to that. Because again, I think the aesthetics of the film are very powerful.
yeah. And it's the great thing about it is it's not CGI, it's all practical, it's all puppets and practical effects, which
Yeah.
is, that's something I think was a Jim Henson was lucky to be working in that era because that's obviously what they're obviously the techniques that he works with. But if there is a remake, which I've heard over the last decade, there have been mooted remakes,
Oh,
and they'll probably use CGI and green screen and all of that. But the fact that it's kind of real, weird little creatures with weird eyebrows and things, I think that makes it even more sort of probably impactful for kids.
yeah,
Or
because
for yeah,
sinister. There's something that
yeah,
is genuinely eerie and
yeah,
scary, and that sort of buzz that generates, especially in the
sure,
young person, I think it's like a worthwhile sort of intro to the mild suspense and horror. And I think that's kind of lost today. I think we've sanitized a lot of media for
right,
kids,
yeah,
and it's not sanitized, which is great. And it is a high watermark for practical effects. And so many of the things that they did in this film had never been tried before. So,
mm,
like a lot of things with Henson, that shaft of hands, that Sarah falls down,
yeah,
was enormously hard to do because no one had ever done anything like it. There were, traps and things that were sort of built into this rigging that could have chopped Jennifer Connelly's fingers off as she fell. And, it was all very much, we're inventing things as we go. And it
yeah.
does feel inventive in that way. I never think we've even talked about the music, but again, as they selected Bowie, he did write 5 songs for this film. Is that
Sure.
right?
Yeah, yeah, and he collaborated with the soundtrack composer, and I mean, it's kind of it's interesting because he didn't really promote it after he did the record. He didn't promote it, and he did that with us as well when we were doing Target, because he sort of, I think he didn't like to be seen to be kind of hawking his wares. He
Hmm.
sort of made a piece of work, and then the work had to kind of go out and do its thing. The music is probably, I don't know, I think it's before Never Let Me Down. Yeah, Never Let Me Down's like
Yeah.
Hmm.
87. So it's got that kind of dance pop element to it. And it's sort of forgotten a little bit, within the Bowie. They're always re-releasing everything, or they were for in earnest for the last sort of 7 or 8 years after he passed away. And Labyrinth is kind of forgotten a little bit because they're good pop tunes. They're very 80s. They're good pop tunes.
They're very
Um,
80s, but I think they're also kind of, they're very Bowie, and they're still
yeah,
very solid in their songcraft. I'm a personal fan of, As the World Falls Down, and I think over
right.
the years, a lot of fans have wondered why maybe he didn't perform that ever on any of his tours, because it's a great song,
Yeah,
its
yeah.
own merit.
Yeah,
But
that's a very
there
good point
is
as well.
that, maybe it was, I don't wanna hawk my wares, I don't wanna, this is maybe not right for this moment, I want it to live in the context of the film.
He did make some music videos though.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of 80s output that he had in film, I mean, I think the first 80s movie is is it Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence? I forget. But anyway, he sort of did that. He did The Hunger. And then he started doing kind of more what would be considered mainstream movies. Even though I think Hunger is a mainstream movie. It's Tony Scott. I
Yeah,
mean, he went on to do, Top
yeah.
Gun and all that other stuff. It's only not a mainstream movie because it wasn't that successful, but it was definitely budgeted and all the rest of it. But yeah, Bowie went on to do a lot of very commercial stuff, and notably Absolute Beginners, which was
Yeah.
the film that bankrupted the British film industry. I mean, it's like that was a weird film because everybody in London was in that at some stage. Like they auditioned. Susie Figgis was the casting director, and she came into my art college, and she was like, "Okay, you, and you come. You're all going to audition." I'm like, "Whoa, okay." I wish they'd done that with Labyrinth. That would have been fun to be in a puppet mask in the background. But
Which one of you knows how to be a puppeteer?
I used to have a puppet show when I was a kid. I was
Oh,
yeah, I was very into puppets. It was I don't know what that says about one's personality, but anyway,
good things.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
Promising beginnings.
Yeah. So the funny thing is that somebody, I'm not remembering this. I've got this written down here. Full disclosure. Somebody said the Goblin King was supposed to be a spoilt child, vain and temperamental, kind of like a rock star.
Mm.
And I think for that reason, Bowie would have been more convincing than say Michael Jackson, who had that sort of. I mean, given in retrospect, it would have been very weird if Michael Jackson had been in that role, but
Oh, extreme. It would not be remembered the same
it wouldn't be remembered in the same way.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
We wouldn't be
No,
covering this on the
absolutely
podcast.
not. And but Bowie was more of that. He could be that temperamental rock star. Prince could have been as well, obviously. So that's why I think it worked with somebody like him, because there was a danger with Bowie, and it could be prickly as well. I mean, I was asked by Target to ask him to perform at the launch when we did the Target collection, and I couldn't not ask him because they'd asked me to ask him. So I said to him, listen, don't shoot the messenger, but they've asked me to ask you if you'll do a couple of songs. And he said, I'm not bloody Posh Spice.
That's amazing.
So he could be quite, like prickly at times.
Right.
He always comes across as being very nice and warm and charming and everything. But, there was like there's an edge there. And I think that comes through in his performances too, which is a good thing, certainly in Labyrinth. Yeah.
Right. No, this is a performance with teeth.
Yeah.
You can absolutely, that's Posh Spice for that is so funny. Why did you get nominated to tell him this? Target. Why did you put Keanan on the spot this way?
I know, it's terrible of them. They make me do their dirty work.
So speaking of that kind of prickliness, so there's that scene where he's like juggling the globes.
Yeah.
But that's not really him.
He's not playing with his own balls, so to speak.
Yeah, he's not playing with his own balls. It's a choreographer juggler named Michael Motion.
Oh, that's a great name.
And they asked David Bowie about it, and because it took a while to get it right with making it look like it's his hands and not there's a person behind him. And Bowie said, "I had fun. I don't think Michael Motion had much fun."
Well, because I've seen some outtakes of this and I've heard this story, and it's literally that Michael Motion got crouching behind him with his arms underneath, like just a really shitty parlor trick, spinning this ball over and over again until it's done to Henson's satisfaction. That crystal ball, Bowie kept it or pilfered it from the set, and you can see it at the David Bowie's exhibit.
Oh, there you go. You see, he was working on that exhibit all along.
Right. He was like, that's okay. It's if you're going to keep me here for, 12 hours making balls spin, I'm stealing this.
Like him and Ian MacKaye just like have like records of everything.
Right.
Yeah. So David used to work with, there was a stylist and photographer that worked with him for a long time called Jimmy King, which is kind of how Jimmy used to borrow clothes from my showroom in New York in the 90s. Which is kind of how I got involved with the whole. I mean, obviously, I was a huge Bowie fan, but that's kind of how the connection came about. And when we were doing, obviously, we did the Target thing. We had these huge presentation boards with illustrations, and David said, "Can I keep a set?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And then he said, "Will you sign them?" Which was really bizarre because, like, I purposely didn't ask him to sign anything all the way through the collaboration. I didn't want to be like a fan. I mean, he knew I was a fan because I told him, but I didn't want to be belaboring it. And so I didn't ask for him to sign anything until the end. But then he asked me to sign these things. And I said to Jimmy, that was weird. Why did he ask me? And Jimmy said, oh, it's for the archive. And I was like, oh, really? And then I got to go into my wife and I got to look at pieces from, they brought out all of these sort of scrapbooks with everything archived. And so they were working on it for a long time before, and I didn't know about the sphere from Labyrinth. I didn't know he kept that. I didn't see that actually. I didn't notice that in the exhibition.
Overwhelming. There are so many things to see and so many artifacts that it's easy to miss. But there is a small section devoted to some of the artifacts from Labyrinth, and the riding crop is one of them, or at least it was in the Brooklyn version of the exhibit.
Yeah, Brooklyn. I went to the London one, and I also went to Brooklyn. And Brooklyn was slightly different. It was different in layout, and it appeared to have different pieces. I don't know if I'm correct or not, but it appeared to have different pieces because that's where I noticed the Berlin keys, and I didn't notice them in London. So yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, that's what a cool privilege to get to see that archive in advance and know that he was building this,
Yeah,
incredible thing. I think it's really standalone an artist to have something like that, and it's a really gift to fans. Not to keep
yeah.
bringing it up, but I did cry several times, so
Well, I think it kicked off the credibility of music artists having a museum exhibit, because obviously the Stones did that one at the Saatchi Gallery in London. The Clash did one. The Jam, Paul Weller and the Jam did one. It's but before that, and Pink Floyd obviously had that huge exhibit. Um, I actually have a good Pink Floyd story. It's a bit of a sidetrack, but a friend of mine's playing with Nick Mason in his band, and I have one of those "I Hate Pink Floyd" T-shirts, which John Lydon used to wear. And when my friend started playing with Nick, this was kind of probably 7 or 8 years ago. It was one of their earliest gigs, and they were playing in Milan, and I was in Italy at the time. And my friend invited me to the show and backstage afterwards. And I took the T-shirt with a fabric pen. I was very, kind of prepared. And but I got a bit, I didn't want to offend Nick or anything. And then I told my friend, oh, I've got this T-shirt with me. And he said, oh, definitely get it out. Nick will love that. And so I showed him, and he was like, oh, this is great. And he signed it. And then he said to me, oh, wait a minute, let me pretend to sign it again, and you take a photograph, because people won't believe it if you don't have a photograph. So he was that into it that he wanted to document it.
wonderful. What a great story.
So yeah, Nick Mason's a good guy. He's doesn't take himself too seriously, obviously.
Can't say that about everyone in Pink
Yeah,
Floyd.
that's true. Roger Waters. No, did I say that?
We
We
won't
won't
name any
name names.
names.
Roger Waters. But yeah, let's get back to Labyrinth, because that's more fun.
Well, I would love to know, I mean, what are kind of your general impressions of the music in this film? Do we feel like it has life outside of the context of the movie? I know a lot of people feel that it's underrated, and a lot of people probably feel like it's just insufferably 80s.
Or do you believe that it is David Bowie's attempt at making children's music?
That's actually, both of those are really good questions. I think that context is everything, and if you were a I am a child of the 80s, because that's kind of like when I grew up. Like I kind of hit my late teens, and then my 20s, so it left a big mark on me, obviously. Um, so I have there's sort of heartwarming stuff about that decade, and I have an affinity with it. So I relate to the music in that way as well. There's kind of like a kitsch factor to it, and I think it definitely it went through a period where everything sounded extremely dated, but now I'm in the gym and I hear a new artist who's kind of doing this, sounds like something from 1984. So it's all context, really. So I think if you were like you two were mere children in the 80s, and you would hear that music in a very different way, and relate to it in a very different way. So I think it stands as it is. If I were um, a record producer, my good friend who lives next door is called Mario McNulty. He's a producer who worked with Tony Visconti for like 20 years, and
Oh,
he
wow.
he, he
Wow.
redid David's album "Never Let Me Down" in a contemporary context, because before David passed away, Mario did a remix of one of the songs with a more contemporary sound. And David said, "Oh, I love that. I wish we could do the whole album like that." And Mario, so he redid the album with real drums, with the Bowie band members, so it had the integrity, but with a more kind of acoustic sound, and with real instruments rather than loads of synthesizers and Linn drums. Um, but there's a big, among Bowie fans, there's a kind of big argument whether the new version improves or actually takes away, because that was an album that was derided by almost everyone, including David. He always went on about how he hated that record. So it's dangerous going back and redoing stuff, and
Mhm.
there's probably a temptation for that with the 5 songs from the Labyrinth soundtrack, because they are good songs. And you could say, oh well, what if we redid it, blah blah blah, in this style? But then it's in a time capsule from 1985, 1986, and I think it should stay there. I think it needs to be, that's the integrity of it. and actually young people that would discover it today would hear it in a different way as well. So they are good songs.
Yeah, I think we discredit and we hinder newer generations' ability to discover things on their own merit when we fall victim to this temptation of trying to redo or reinterpret or remake a film like Labyrinth, which I'm not sure could be made today. I tend to think that as synth and as 80s as these songs are, and I hope it's not like nostalgia bias, because I think there is obviously a nostalgia bias for this movie, but I think I agree with you. I think they need to kind of stay intact as they are, even if they have great bones as songs.
Yeah. I mean, if they remake that film today, it has to be Chalamet.
Well,
because he's in everything else, so it has to be Chalamet.
kidding? He's Wonka. He's Jareth. He's Bob Dylan. What are we not going to give to Timmy Chalamet?
That would be good.
Don't put that in the universe, Keanan.
I know. That's going to manifest. Yeah.
It's funny. I heard that they were thinking about making a sequel to Labyrinth.
Yeah. I've heard that a few times.
And and so I think last I heard is Scott Dickerson. Is that his name? The guy who did Doctor Strange, the first Doctor Strange movie.
Right.
He was gonna do it, but I think they parted ways, and it's back to the drawing board. I know that the Henson family will be involved, but I just don't see a 2020 blank Labyrinth 2 sequel being anywhere as magical as this original from 1986.
Yeah, and I think, in the lore of the film, or in the realm of fantasy, if you believe that Jareth, the Goblin King, can live forever, and then suddenly he's not there, that's the center point of the film that you've sucked out. Also, like, I don't know who's going to deliver a line like "You remind me of the babe with the power," like Bowie can. Who's going to do the gurgles in that song? Because he does the baby gurgles in that song.
I think if it were made today, I'm ashamed to say I'm not remembering her name, but the director of The Substance, I would love her to direct it, and I would love the Goblin King to be a woman, like a female actress, but probably keep the codpiece, because that would really mess with people's minds. It's like,
yes, that is such a good idea that we can manifest.
Maybe I don't know, Margaret Qualley.
Yeah,
she could be good as the Goblin King, or I mean, I'm like I said, I'm ashamed today I'm forgetting the name of that director, but that movie is so brilliantly conceived and brilliantly stylized, but it would probably be not Jim Henson enough to pass muster with the Jim Henson family, because I guess they're probably the guardians at the gate. But I would love to see just a very different version of it, or even an animated version. Something.
An animated version, I think, would be really worthwhile. I actually think that would be a great exploration. But I also like the idea of sort of gender bent Jareth, if that wasn't what was happening already.
Yeah, it was kind of going there. So like, let's go completely there in sort of the other way. It would be very interesting.
Yeah, Coralie Fargate.
Yeah,
she's the
French, and I wasn't going to attempt to say her name because I know I would butcher it.
Yeah, I immediately regret trying.
Yeah, I would also regret it.
But one thing I do have to tell you as well, though. So I've got my notes here, so I'm full disclosure, but I almost forgot about this. So Steve Barron made some of the videos for, I forget which song, maybe it was Underground, I forget. But Steve Barron was a really big music video director, British guy, and he made the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies and several other big Hollywood. He went on to make big Hollywood movies. But in the 80s, when I was in college, I was making records, and I was managed by this guy who managed Adam and the Ants, actually, when it was still the band. And the guy's name is Falcon Stewart, who's a kind of famous sort of punk manager. And so he invited me around for dinner one evening, and I had a very pretty girlfriend when I was in school, and I think he was kind of more inviting the girlfriend than me. But anyway, we went around for dinner, and there was a guy there who was sort of like obviously a creative, and he was talking about the industry and this, that, and the other. And at the end of the dinner, he brought out this VHS and he said, "Oh, would you like to see the new movie that the new video that I've directed?" And we were like, "Yeah, okay, And so he put it on, and it was Dire Straits' "Money for Nothing."
Wow.
And
Wow.
Nope.
after it ended, it hadn't been shown anywhere, so it was like not even released or anything. And after it ended, he turned to me and said, "What do you think?" And it was like one of those things in a movie where everybody's head turns to the one person in the room. And I said, "Well, it's good that you can't see Dire Straits in it."
That's so good.
And he was like, "Oh yeah, snotty kid, like on with dessert kind of thing. We don't care what you think." He went on to be Steve Barron, and so it didn't hurt his career at all. But yeah, he did. I think. Wait a minute, I do have it in my notes here. He did Underground and As the World Falls Down. So he did both of those music videos. So yeah, I should have kept my mouth shut. He might have worked with me.
Yeah, and I guess Jim Henson liked those videos so much that he recruited Barron to direct the Storyteller television series
Oh
that Jim
right,
Henson
yeah,
ended up doing.
yeah. He's still working. I mean, Steve Barron's. He did some quite big things recently. I forget what they are, but he did a few, sort of more recent pieces of work that are very well regarded. I mean, he was kind of at that time he was like the big guy in London. He had this video production company called Limelight, and then an offshoot of that was called The Unit. And The Unit did the video for Massive Attack's Unfinished Symphony. They did a lot of like really cool music videos. That was a bit later, but yeah, it was. He was not the guy to make an enemy of. So there you go.
No, and I mean, he was creeping around your girlfriend, so.
No, it wasn't him. It was.
No, that was the
Right.
manager.
Yeah.
Apologies.
Sorry, Steve. We don't mean to have a go at you.
I mean, he did do the Take on Me video.
Oh
too.
yeah, right. Of course.
Yeah, again, no big deal. Not,
Yeah.
absolutely world-changing music videos.
So what else about let's get back to Labyrinth.
So speaking of being cutting edge, like David Bowie, the puppets that they had to create for Labyrinth were also very cutting edge. Hoggle is kind of the main of the puppets that interacts with Jennifer
a great
Connelly.
name.
His face was made up of 18 motors.
Wow.
And it took 4 people to operate it.
And today they'd be just like, "Oh, we'll do it in post."
Right. We'll just put a green mask over your face. We'll
Ping
figure
pong
it
balls. We'll get who's that guy who's always in the Planet of the Apes films?
Andy
Andy
Serkis.
Serkis. We'll get Andy Serkis. He'll be Hoggle.
Yeah.
It's a good cat name, Hoggle. I'm going to name one of my cats Hoggle.
It's
Well, that is
it's
a
a
good
very
name.
charming sort of name, actually.
And then Ludo, the big lovable monster who can control rocks with his yelling. The original costume for Ludo weighed over 100 pounds,
Wow.
and they were able to get it down to 75.
Wow.
That's as light as they're able to get it. And then at the London premiere, Ludo got to meet Princess Diana and Prince Charles. I guess now King
But not in
Charles.
costume.
Yeah, Ludo. Yeah, maybe
Maybe.
I don't know.
Ludo?
I don't know who's in the costume. Maybe no. Maybe he was just Ludo.
I know at least on the US side, it was not a box office success, this film. Although it's taken on this enormous cult status, it was a pretty big critical failure, which was a big disappointment to Jim Henson. Before he passed, he was, I think, very heartened to learn that it was gaining this traction and that so many people really did love it. And it's had such an enduring legacy, but it did not hit when it came out.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't going to be a hit in the UK because that was the point at which the press turned on Bowie, because he'd had this huge success with the Serious Moonlight tour, and then obviously Let's Dance the record, and he started working with Nile Rodgers and everything before Duran Duran and everyone else. Madonna started working with Nile and kind of had sort of reinvented pop in a way. But then he became a pop star. And I think the press, mainstream media and the music press suddenly turned on him for that. So it almost didn't matter what he was going to do. He was going to be derided for it. And I think they probably didn't like the idea of him doing what essentially was a children's movie in their, in their mind. So I think, and you're really absolutely correct. It's been reassessed in subsequent decades, and it's now got this amazing cult status. So I mean, I think with Bowie, he did things that were so much ahead of the curve, and then years later, you kind of find, oh yeah, well, I could see why that happened, and I could see why probably it wasn't successful, but actually, it was the right move for him to do at the time.
Yeah.
So
I feel is so much of that is it's a knee-jerk response to the unknown or to the unfamiliar that people have viscerally when they've never
Sure.
experienced something before.
Yeah.
And so I feel like so much of Bowie's canon it's like that. There are things that didn't gain prominence until much, much later or
Yeah.
weren't appreciated like they should have been when they first came out. It's also really interesting that you mention the difference between the UK reception and the US reception of Bowie in the 80s. And Bowie is this enormous Let's Dance fame, arena rock pop star.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like there wasn't a backlash here. There was an embrace of Bowie as this figure. What was sort of at least in your experience, what was the sort of backlash to him in the UK in the 80s?
So Bowie, he'd never sold a lot of records. If you kind of look at his record sales, and he always said that. I mean, it's obviously contextual as well compared to other artists. He was massively successful, but compared to other big rock artists at the time, like Bruce Springsteen, for example, Bowie never sold a lot of music because he had had some success in America. He had a number one hit single with Fame, and he had some success in America, but that kind of went away. It came back again in earnest, I think, with the Let's Dance record and the Serious Moonlight tour. And I think then the American media saw him as being on par with Michael Jackson, with Madonna, with Prince. He was kind of in that echelon of performers who were going to do Live Aid, for example. Everybody that was at Live Aid was a megastar at that time, and so he was kind of put into that pocket. And I don't think that the American media resented his former sort of experimentation. They whereas the British saw the former experimentation and then the commercial success as being a sellout, and like, why isn't he still doing a record where one side's completely instrumental and ambient music, and he's doing it in Berlin and everything. I think he recognized that you kind of have to do this. I mean, this is something that I actually picked up from him. You kind of have to try and cross over into the mainstream. The trick then is getting back into being a sort of credible, creative person. I mean, I'm not making any comparisons or anything, but that's what I tried to do with Target, is to kind of go into the mainstream, and then it sort of does something to as an artist. I think it gives you a certain level of confidence, and I do think that that's what he wanted to do with Let's Dance, with Serious Moonlight, and then with movies like Labyrinth. He wanted to reach critical mass where he could speak to a really big audience. He could talk to the little kid that was growing up in Boise, Idaho, and would go and see Labyrinth and would think like, oh, wow, Bowie. And then they'd dig away and find those Berlin albums with the instrumental sides and everything. And I think that he was very savvy in doing that because he couldn't keep being the David Bowie of the 70s. The 80s were a very different era. And also he had so many imitators and people that were influenced by him at that time, that were really crossing over, like Psychedelic Furs, for example, or Bauhaus, or any number of artists who, Duran. I mean, they kind of whole career, they say this, it's based on what Bowie did. And yet, by that point, he couldn't kind of compete with them. So he had to sort of move on to that next level. And I think Michael Jackson really defined the stardom in the 80s with Thriller, because he made this album where every song was a single and every song had a visual element to it. And then he could take that into performance. And so I think that what David did with Let's Dance was I mean, he could never compete with Thriller, but he made an album where 5 of the songs were big hit singles, and he had accompanying videos and so forth. And so he crossed over, and Labyrinth was a step into doing that as well, working with Jim Henson, one of the sort of iconic creatives of American culture in the 70s and the 80s. So, why not go there and see what can happen when you're in that space? You can actually sneak in a huge codpiece and freak everyone out.
I mean, and I don't think it should be discounted that this is a very weird film. It's a
It's
very
weird. Yeah.
it's weird. It's weird and it's wonderful. And if
Yeah.
you were a weird kid or a queer kid growing up in the 80s,
Yeah.
this was something that you could find yourself in, that
Totally.
you could see yourself in. That yes, you can mess around with gender. Yes, like you can, lean fully into this fantasy of who you want to be. And I think that's in part why it's spoken to so many different generations of people and continues to, because
Yeah.
despite all the 80s trappings, at its heart, it's something fundamentally made by creative
Sure.
souls.
And it's Hansel and Gretel, it's the Brothers Grimm, it's all of those stories are actually really weird.
Yeah.
I mean, they're really,
Dark,
the
weird, grim,
dark. Yeah, Hansel and Gretel is kind of, if I'm remembering correctly, it's they're kind of eating children and things. It's like, I mean, it's weird, So all of those folk tales are actually very perverse, and I think that's what is credible about this movie. The perverse aspect of it was kind of sneaked into the mainstream. So all of the creators that are involved in it, whether it's the production team, the costuming people, the illustrators, the storyboarders, they all kind of were on board to make something that was a little bit bizarre, and it was successful.
Yeah, so I found a story about Bowie. It's weird. He didn't promote the movie, but he met this autistic boy at a Labyrinth event. And to ease his nerves, Bowie shared a story about his own magic mask that helped him face fears. And he ended up spending like 30 minutes with the boy, and the boy left the conversation much more confident.
Great.
And I
Yeah,
think it's
it's wonderful.
I think it's just amazing how, he was able to, understand like how the movie could help people, like young
Sure,
children, and
sure.
and he understood the themes of the movie, and it wasn't just kind of just a, I don't know, I wouldn't say it was just a paycheck, but he really tried to understand and connect with the character and connect with the film.
I mean,
Yeah,
when you talk about commitment to a role, commitment to a bit, this is definitely one of the things that should come into that conversation, because there's no point in this film where you do not feel that he is committed fully
Hmm.
to being Jareth.
yeah, yeah. He doesn't let the sort of mask slide in any way. I mean, I think that was true across sort of all of the roles, that he undertook. I mean, it was in the Twin Peaks character. I mean, in Twin
Yes,
Peaks, he turns up, he's doing a weird Southern accent, and
right.
it's kind of almost like, wait a minute, but he's so into it. He doesn't not for a second is there kind of like a crack in the performance where you think, oh, he doesn't have the confidence to stay with us and carry it through. And I think when he got into something, he was into it and he was committed, and he was that. He became that, which goes back to the actor standpoint. And I mean, Slick always says to me, David wasn't a great musician, but he was a great actor, and every song that he wrote, it was a role that he would then perform. And I think that's true. Uh, Often some of his cinematic output is derided, as many rock stars try to act, and some are successful, some aren't. I mean, Lady Gaga's been amazingly successful, but for every artist like that, there's Mariah Carey in Glitter, who does
Madonna.
that, and then or Madonna, yeah. And then they never get a chance. Madonna's had a few chances, but some rock performers or music performers do one thing, and then they never get another chance because they're just obviously it's not them. And I think Bowie was actually very good. He probably made some mistakes in terms of roles that he picked, um, but I don't think Labyrinth is one of them. Actually, I did at the time. I was like, well, wait a minute, what's going on? But when you actually watch it and you understand the context of it and the fact that you're not the only audience for it, there's a very broad audience, and actually you're not the top of the pyramid of that audience. The people that he's really speaking to is a very different generation. It's an embryonic generation, and it's not you. And you have to let go of wanting him to be the man who fell to earth or Ziggy Stardust, because this is not that.
Mm.
And he's totally into it. So good for him.
I think that's such a nice thing to say, right? 'Cause that makes so much sense and tracks so well with his career, is this idea of transition and of letting go,
Yeah,
that you never live with anything for too long. Everything is essentially ephemeral. And there is no the one state that you live in for forever.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think he sort of had this when he played at Glastonbury in 2000. He had a bit of a reassessment, I think, because he'd had this career of always letting go and never looking back, but still keeping an archive along the way. But at Glastonbury, he did what he said he wasn't ever going to do, which was he did his greatest hits again. But I think he connected with such a broad audience there that he realized I'm actually not just trading on my past. I'm not being a retro artist if I do these songs, because they mean something to different generations, and that they have a validity. And I think that we probably would find that with the canon of cinematic work that he's done. I mean, he wasn't first and foremost an actor; he was a musical performer, and that's where he had his success. Without that success, he wouldn't have been able to cross over into doing any of the other things that he did. And he was quite clear about that, I think. So he almost the sort of second string to his bow in a way was acting, but I think he was so committed to it as much as he was with his musical output. And Labyrinth is great because of that.
And I think if you can act much like Michael Caine in The Muppet Christmas Carol alongside Muppets and treat it like it's Shakespeare, then, that's talent.
Michael Caine's the greatest actor of all time.
Truly.
He made more movies than anyone else.
Also true.
Yeah, well, there you go. Labyrinth.
So we've covered a couple other Bowie movies. Well, not with him in them, but
Adjacent.
he's a big part of like why we love these movies. So we did 1998's Velvet Goldmine, which is not about Bowie, wink wink,
Yeah.
and and The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, which literally just has a guy on a boat playing David Bowie songs.
Yeah, that's an amazing soundtrack, and I think that was probably something that when he heard it, it kind of reinvigorated his love of his back catalogue, because you can interpret they're great songs. They stand the test of time, and you can reinterpret them in different ways, and that was a very authentic reinterpretation, I think. And what was the other movie you mentioned?
Velvet Goldmine.
Oh, Velvet Goldmine, yeah, which is great. I mean, Todd Haynes, amazing director, great performances from everyone. My brain's completely going. Toni Collette. I was trying to remember Toni Collette's name. I mean, what an amazing actress. That was kind of her. I don't know if it was her breakthrough. I think she'd done other things before that, but it was a kind of iconic performance. And then, the sort of the Brian Slade character, the Bowie character, and the Kurt Wilde. Is it Kurt Wilde?
Yeah.
The Iggy Pop character. Again, they're totally. I mean, great performances. Ewan, who's always amazing, and what's the fellow who played Brian? He's going out of my mind. Jonathan Rhys-Meyers is amazing too. I mean, he would actually be. He's probably a little bit too old for it, but he would be a great Jareth if they did a remake.
Yeah, in his prime, I think he would have been wonderful for it. He's such a revelation in Velvet Goldmine, because who can play any kind of facsimile of Bowie, really, especially that early 70s era of Bowie. But he did it with such,
And he was amazing in the Tudors too. He can do the kind of, the regal spoilt brat rock star thing.
He's got the gravitas.
Maybe he could voice it. They do the animation, Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, or they do motion capture on him or something.
Animated Velvet Goldmine is just made specifically for me, I think.
I'm
to
amazed
audience.
there hasn't been a comic book, a graphic novel of that would be fantastic.
I'm amazed that it isn't celebrated a bit more than it is, especially it being such a Todd Haynes film, and he as a director is so
Yeah,
lauded.
sure.
Maybe it'll get its time.
Yeah. It was a great soundtrack too,
Yes,
Right.
because you had, the guys from Radiohead and, guys from a couple of other, I forget,
Like Sonic Youth and
Sonic Youth,
Television
yeah,
and
and they redid those songs, especially the Roxy Music redos are difficult to do without it falling into parody, and
sure.
they're very authentic renditions. Yeah, so I love that. I love that movie.
Well, if we ever do Velvet Goldmine Revisited, you are going to be our guest. And
Yeah, give me a shout, please.
by the time,
absolutely.
so
Yeah, we interviewed one of the bands, or one of the guys from one of the bands that wrote original music for Velvet Goldmine,
Right.
and he said, you know, the soundtrack supervisor came to him and was like, "Hey, would you like to write some like Bowie-esque music for our movie?" And they're like, "Well, of course, like we love
Yeah.
Bowie."
That one track. It's kind of like a colloquial phrase in England. I forget the track name, but it's brilliant and it's so of the era. They capture the parlance and everything really well. Anything that kind of, not necessarily, I mean, Bowie, but obviously, but like the sort of second-rate glam bands that were around at that time that were
sure.
kind of, I mean, that's who I grew up with them, not with, but Bowie was a little bit above my, it was a little bit too highbrow for me as a kid. I bought the singles, but the albums, and I didn't get into him until probably in 1975. They re-released Space Oddity, and it was a huge hit, and that's kind of when I got into it, and that was probably
Mm,
around the time just before Man Who Fell to Earth.
mm.
So Man Who Fell to Earth came out in real time for me, and then I was like, oh, this is amazing. This he's an alien. That all makes sense. But all of those, yeah, those other bands that were like, Gary Glitter, who shall remain nameless. But Slade, who are an amazing. I mean, Slade sound to me like John Lennon Beatles.
Mhm.
That kind of plodding piano and everything. They're fantastic. And then, yeah, Wizard, that came out of, they were called The Move in the 60s, and then they kind of went on to break in half, and half of them became ELO and the other half became Wizard, which was, and Susie Quattro, amazing. So yeah, it's a great era for stomping pop singles and tight trousers.
So one thing that I thought about coming into this interview is, I was like 16 or 17 when Zoolander came out, and David
Hmm.
Bowie makes a cameo as himself in that film. And like I knew it was Bowie. I hadn't really like dove into the Bowie catalog, but like my brain wasn't like, why is he in this movie? You just like accept him as like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's David Bowie, and of
yeah,
course he is going to MC this fashion off.
yeah. Well, he had a good sense of humor. He had a really good sense of humor, and that's often overlooked because he was sort of such an experimental, non-specific gender morphing person as David Bowie that people overlook that he was really funny. He's kind of like had a good, based on a lot of British 50s and 60s humor, and also the Monty Python and all of that. He loved all of that, and so I think he was. I mean, Slick told me when they did Reality, which was the last tour that he actually was able to do, that David really enjoyed that, and all they did the whole time was clown around. There's a little clip of them going into some roadside gas station, and he gets these like glittery, flashing clip-on things, and puts them on his ears and his nose and everything, and he's kind of like, oh yeah, here I am, and back to being Ziggy Stardust. And he was self-deprecating, and he kind of was aware of the in quote unquote David Bowie persona, and then but he could switch that off. So I think, to your point, in Zoolander, he was being David Bowie. He was being the person that everybody expects is what David Bowie's going to be when he shows up. And when he showed up to meet with me, he was dressed quite scruffily and not at all not at all the kind of rock star persona, not in any iota. Which again, at the time, I thought that was an act. I was like, oh, is he doing like? Why is he being normal? you know, but in whatever normal is. But in a way, I think that was a very good characteristic of his to sort of disarm.
Mm.
But probably it was also he was David Jones. He was just on his day off. He didn't have to wear a funny clothes, or makeup or whatever. So it was. I think that was an example. Zoolander was him being David Bowie, and he's all serious and he's like, right, boys, go to your corners and here we go. It's kind of another great little cameo. One of my favorite other cameos of his, it's not actually him because he passed away, but David Lynch in that new Twin Peaks, he kind of created the character from the first series, the Philip Jeffries character. And in the new version, it looks like a big kettle, like a sort of Victorian kettle, and that's supposed to be Bowie. And I thought that's so spot on because if he had been alive, he would have wanted that to be the character that he played. It was kind of David Lynch had it so down.
Yeah, you have to love that collaboration between Lynch and Bowie. What a perfect just
Yeah.
duo weirdness.
Yeah, weird, and they're both really funny people as well. They both have an amazing self-deprecating sense of humor. So
yeah, Lynch
Yeah.
is another person who I think doesn't get enough credit for being sort of wry and funny, but intentional about it.
Yeah. I mean, just to finish, going back to Labyrinth, I think actually the fact that he plays it completely straight and he doesn't like do any winks and he doesn't actually let down the guard, it is actually amazing because he could have played that game where he's sort of winking to his actual audience and saying, yeah, I know this is kind of ridiculous, but I know that you know that I know, and we're all in this together. And he didn't do that. And credit to him for that, because that would have, I think, sold out that young audience that were just really into this Goblin King, and they didn't know or care about David Bowie or any of the music. They
Right.
probably didn't even recognize that it was him singing the soundtrack. They were
Right.
just into this character, and that I think David was always, he made that Prokofiev voiceover, and he did other things that were aimed at children specifically. And I think he had that empathy with young children. He'd loved young children, and he didn't want to sell them out by sort of giving a wink to the fact that the Goblin King was kind of ridiculous in a way, but he just stayed in it 100%. So good for him. Go Jareth.
Yeah. Even though I heard at the beginning of shooting, it was difficult for both him and Jennifer Connelly to be interacting with the puppets. Like they had to kind of, get
I'm
used
sure.
to kind of that sort of
Well, and there
to
are
be able to play it straight, right? Because
Yeah,
it's not a
yeah.
comedy, right? Like
No,
to
no.
dramatically act with puppets.
and
Yeah.
let's be honest, puppetry is such a bizarre thing when you see
Sure.
behind the scenes of it, and there are all these people manipulating the puppets themselves. There are voices being thrown from directions that you don't anticipate as an actor. I'm sure all of that was very foreign. Would have
Yeah.
been foreign to anyone at the time, but
Sure.
particularly for
Yeah,
him.
I believe Jennifer Connelly said it's like you're talking to someone that's in front of you, but their answer is coming from like the side.
Yeah, pretty bizarre. But Bowie probably experienced some of that in the 70s when he was taking a lot of drugs.
This
So
reminds me of
it could be fun. Yeah. Oh, this is just like when we were recording station to station. I'm talking to you, but the voice is coming from inside my head.
True. He's probably the one person that's sort of unflappable in that way. Like, well, I've been through weirder.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, thank you, Keanan, for coming on our podcast.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm sorry I was a little bit late, and you're right. I was trying to update Google Chrome.
No problem. Yeah, we loved chatting with you.
It was great fun. Thank you. Good to meet you both.
So yeah, it was great to meet you. You can check out Slinky Vagabond. They have a new album coming out on January 14th.
Indeed. Buy the vinyl.
Buy the vinyl. Don't just stream it.
Always.
It's red vinyl. I mean, you can't go wrong with red vinyl.
So the album's called The Eternal Return. You can check out the single now called Strange World. That's on all your digital services, right?
It's on all. It's yeah, all the all the streaming, and it's a CD too. So no cassettes, unfortunately, but maybe we'll get to that in the future. And the joke is, the eternal return, because on vinyl you're going round and round and round, and then you just start at the
Oh,
beginning again.
I love that.
So there's many different meanings to the title.
And you can check out the Slinky Vagabonds back catalog as well
Yeah, please.
while you're waiting for the new record to come out.
Sounds good.
We'll put a link to pre-order that on our show notes for this episode.
Thank you.
You can find us on Twitter or on Blue Sky at SoundtrackCast, on Instagram as well, and we have a Patreon, patreon.com/soundtrack, patreon.com/soundtrack your life if you would like bonus episodes. Thank you so much, Keenan. We had
My
a
pleasure.
blast.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, a pure delight.
Lovely
so
to meet you both.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much. for
thank you so
speaking with
much.
us. Yeah.
See
Have
you. Maybe see you for Velvet Goldmine.
Oh, please.
Yes.
Ryan's like, they kill me, but I would love to do it again. We could do it all year. Favorite.
Oh, well,
All right.
I'll make
Thanks for having
something happen.